welcome to Wellbeing Monitor for wellness, development and resilience. Nurture your mind one moment at a time. Track your well-being with daily check-ins, psychometric assessments and a personalised emotional AI assistant available for hourly sessions each day, supporting your self-care with meditations, affirmations, journaling and brain training. Get 3 months free when you subscribe today. On algorithmic scrolling behaviour and Pandora's box. The story of Pandora's box comes from Greek mythology and serves as one of the earliest cautionary tales about curiosity and risk. According to the myth, Zeus ordered the creation of Pandora, the first woman, as a way to punish humankind after Prometheus had stolen fire for them. Each of the gods bestowed gifts upon her: beauty, charm, skill, and crucially a deep sense of curiosity. Along with these gifts, she was given a sealed container, often described as a jar in the original text, but later misrepresented as a box. However, colloquially, we know the parable, the story, the allegory as Pandora's box, and she was warned never to open this box. Inevitably, Pandora's curiosity overcame her restraint, and when she lifted the lid, all the miseries of human existence, disease, sorrow, greed, pain, and death, escaped into the world. Terrified, she slammed the lid shut. But by then, only one thing remained inside: hope. As a myth, Pandora's box is more than just a story of disobedience. It is a metaphor for the dangers of engaging with the unknown. The moment of opening represents a gamble. What lies inside could be treasure or it could be torment, but once revealed, its consequences cannot be undone. This gamble with uncertainty, deeply rooted in the human psyche, is a theme that stretches far beyond mythology and echoes into the way we behave in this modern epoch. Engaging with the unknown, from Pandora to the Stoics. The idea that opening ourselves to the unknown can reshape our lives is not unique to Greek myth. The Stoic philosophers repeatedly warned that we may allow into our minds, senses, leaves lasting impressions on the whole self. What we allow into our minds and senses leaves lasting impressions on the whole self, mind, body, and soul, thoughts, feelings, and behaviours. In many ways, they recognize the same principle that Pandora's box illustrates. Once something has entered, it cannot easily be undone. Plato warned that the beginning is the most important part of the work, for that is the time at which the character is being formed. What we let into our mind and senses is what we allow our perception to become the foundation of who we are. Epictetus offered the practical reminder: it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. Impressions are not passive, they actively shape our emotions and decisions. Marcus Aurelius in his Meditations echoed this when he wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the colour of its thoughts." For the Stoics, as for the technologists, impressions are not trivial flickers of perception, but forces that shape one's reality, identity, and even moral health. When we link this to Pandora's box and the act of opening the box itself, the parallel becomes clear. The myth is not only about unleashing evils into the world, but also about how exposure to impressions, whether external events, images, or ideas, changes the very fabric of our existence. Just as Pandora could not return evils once released, we cannot unsee or unexperience the impressions we let in. This recognition lays the groundwork for understanding the modern distinction between short-form and long-form content, and how different models of media consumption imprint themselves on memory, attention, and even the body itself. When we think and link this to Pandora's act of opening the box, the parallel becomes clear. The myth is not only about unleashing abstract evils into the world, but also about how exposure to impressions, whether external events, images, or ideas, changes the very fabric of our existence. Just as Pandora could not return the evils once opening the box had commenced, we cannot unsee or unexperience the impressions we let in. In the modern digital epoch, the parallels are striking. Gluttony in food trends and endless promotion of unhealthy consumption, lust reflected in the constant stream of sexualized content, pride in ego-driven feeds and performative self-comparison, disease in sedentary scrolling, known as doom scrolling, that locks the body in place and erodes health. Envy, greed, and anger also appear and are algorithmically amplified to impact the user, keep them engaged, and within the application itself, the algorithm. What escaped Pandora's box now takes the form of curated feeds that entice us to open just one more post, reel, or video. The box has become endless, portable, and interactive, an algorithmic engine of impressions that reach not only our minds but also alter our bodies and behaviors in ways the Stoics warned us to guard against. The language of modern platforms makes this connection even clearer. What we now call feed is, in essence, media delivered directly to the user without deliberate selection, just as one is fed food. This is not a neutral metaphor. To be fed implies passivity, dependency. The consumer does not choose what to eat, but is given a pre-prepared portion. In the same way, users continually supplied with images, videos, and impressions that they did not actively seek out. This demonstrates a key feature of addiction, a progressive loss of agency and autonomy. Research on behavioral addiction consistently shows that as compulsive patterns develop, individuals report feeling less in control of their choices and more driven by the platform's rhythms than by their own intentions. Carderfelt-Winther, 2017. This reduction of agency creates fertile ground for psychological subversion. The For You page, celebrated for its personalization, is in fact built on... I apologize for the slides there. Is in fact built on an array of user data points, from age to location, gender, likes and dislikes, time spent on content, and even inferred mood or vulnerabilities. What appears to be a mirror of the user is also a projection of the developer's priorities and the platform's commercial or political agenda. Noble, 2018, Zuboff, 2019. Thus, what escapes Pandora's box is not random. It is curated, optimized, and fed back to the user in ways that can amplify desire, insecurity, fear, or distraction. Where the Stoics warned of impressions shaping the soul, here the impressions are actively engineered to do so. From impressions to conditioning, the scientific processes. The Stoics warned that impressions mould the soul, and modern science has provided a framework to explain how this moulding takes place. Beginning in the late 19th century, Ivan Pavlov demonstrated that even basic organisms could have their natural instincts reshaped through classical conditioning. In his well-known experiments, dog began to salivate not only at the sight of food but the sound of a bell that had repeatedly been paired with feeding. Pavlov, 1927. What this revealed is that an organism's evolved survival response, salvation in anticipation for food, could be hijacked by an arbitrary signal. A fundamental biological drive was effectively overridden through learning. Several decades later, Skinner extended this work through his research on operant conditioning, using boxes designed to deliver food pellets when pigeons or rats pressed buttons. Skinner demonstrated that behavior could be shaped by reinforcement and punishment. Skinner, 1938. Most strikingly, he showed that behavior was most persistent when rewards were developed on a variable ratio schedule, unpredictably. Like in gambling, this was powerful because it leveraged the evolutionary gamble driver, the same instinct that once pushed humans to forage and take risks in uncertain environments, could now be captured in an experimental box. The pigeons pecked compulsively, not out of hunger alone, but out of the dopamine-charged anticipation of the next uncertain reward. Importantly, The targets of the gamble driver shift as humans satisfy successive layers of need, a pattern that can be understood through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the most basic level, when physiological needs dominate, the gamble is directed towards tangible survival rewards such as food, water, and shelter. Once safety needs are met, the drive moves towards security, stability, manifesting in risk-taking behaviors that test environmental or social boundaries. As social and belonging needs emerge, the gamble driver increasingly motivates interactions with others, seeking connection, approval, and recognition within a group. With esteem needs, risk-taking is orientated towards status, achievement, and reputation, while at the level of self-actualization, the drive can shift towards abstract exploration, creativity, and learning. Crucially, although modern individuals are rarely gambling with money, food, or other direct survival resources, as in Skinner's box or a traditional casino, the gamble has not disappeared. It has shifted into the domain of experience itself. Every swipe, click, or scroll represents a wager on what comes next, an investment of attention, time, and emotional engagement in the unpredictable rewards offered by scrolling content, short-form media. Algorithmically curated feeds exploit this experiential gamble, tapping into novelty, social validation, and identity-related content, thereby hijacking the evolutionary grounded drive across multiple layers of psychological need. In this way, scrolling behavior transforms a fundamental survival mechanism into a continuous modern gamble with experiences rather than material rewards. At the same time, research in developmental psychology has shown that humans possess strong innate drive towards novelty. In classic-looking time studies, infants reliably spend more time focusing on a new object than a familiar one. Fantz, 1964. This novelty preference demonstrates that the search for new stimuli is not learned but hardwired into our cognition. The gamble driver then is not simply about survival, food, or safety, but also about exploring the unknown, a mechanism that once kept our ancestors moving from environment to environment and that now keeps our attention hooked on ever-refreshing feeds. Curiously, humans evolved to experience transition phases when moving between environments. Entering a new space, pausing, orienting, and adjusting provided the nervous system with time to regulate and assess risk. Digital platforms deliberately exploit this mechanic by removing the pause. With infinite scroll or autoplay, the user is thrust immediately into the next environment without transition. This collapse of boundaries amplifies the gamble drive, producing a rapid-fire succession of novel stimuli without the natural evolutionary checks that once helped us modulate attention and arousal. To provide a clear example of this, as humans, we moved from the beach to the marshland to the plain to the forest to the rocky outcrops to the mountain, and vice versa, each one with a hedgerow or a shingle to separate different environmental biomes. And the scrolling behavior is almost a teleportation process that we have not got an evolutionary capacity to process it coherently within our psyche. Albert Pandora then expanded the conditioning tradition into the social realm with his social learning theory through the famous Bobo doll experiments. Pandora showed that pupils, participants who merely observed adults acting aggressively were more likely to reproduce that aggression towards themselves. Pandora, 1977. Crucially, no direct reinforcement was required. The learning occurred vicariously, simply by watching. This demonstrated that media itself could shape cognition and behavior without physical participation. Taken together, these findings show a progression. Pavlov, conditioning can override evolved biological responses. Skinner, gambling-based reinforcement taps directly into survival circuitry. Novelty studies and habituation-looking studies demonstrate humans are evolutionarily biased towards novelty. Transition phases, natural pauses in shifting environments regulate attention, and the media design removes them to intensify reward-seeking behaviors. Pandora shows that observation through media produces vicarious learning impacting thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Modern scrolling platforms therefore combine these mechanics. The infinite feed delivers unpredictable rewards, uses conditioned associations to drive anticipation, exploits our inbuilt attraction to novelty, collapses natural transition phases to accelerate the gamble driver and immerse users in vicarious experiences that shape identity, mood, and behavior. Across all of these mechanisms, the targets of engagement align with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, from satisfying social and esteem drivers through likes, shares, and status cues, to appealing to self-actualization through novel ideas, experiences, or creative content. In this sense, algorithmic media does not simply entertain, it actively overrides evolutionary capabilities, hijacks need across multiple psychological layers, and exerts influence across the whole self in their thoughts, their feelings, and their behaviors. We are a triune being. What I haven't mentioned in that is also the utilization of fractionation, which is used in hypnotherapy and a process of moving one in and out of their window of tolerance, that way growing the window of tolerance and susceptibility to the impressions being taken in by the viewer individual engaged in algorithmic scrolling behaviors. You can liken this to the experiences that are dyeing the soul as wool in Aurelius's statement. Can think of it as a really strong dye. It will turn the whole wool purple, for example, and that's due to the increased suggestibility utilized within fractionation methodologies, in which media will move an individual outside of the window of tolerance and then back into it, but with a larger sway each time of the pendulum between outside of window of tolerance and inside of the window of tolerance, which will create an effect that even if things are stressful, it will be okay, there will be safety again. And so it makes it more likely that that thoughts, feelings, and behaviors can be impacted in some way by the media that's being consumed, specifically in algorithmic short form content scrolling behaviors. Alongside these psychological processes that impact the outcomes of engaging in scrolling behaviors, there's also neuroplasticity to consider. The human's brain is remarkably plastic, holding plasticity, neuroplasticity, brain plasticity. There's a few jargon words to describe that concept, which offers immense potential for learning and adaptation and creates heightened sensitivity to environmental inputs during development. Neuroplasticity allows young people who are still developing to acquire complex skills, regulate emotion, and form social cognition. And it also means that experiences, both positive and negative, can leave enduring traces on neural architecture. Educational engagement, bilingualism, musical training, and other cognitively stimulating activities have been shown to enhance neural connectivity, increase grey matter density, and even confer resilience against age-related cognitive decline. Bielstock, Crack, and Luke, 2012. These experiences harness the brain's natural adaptability to strengthen the executive functioning, memory encoding, and attentional control, supporting the higher levels of Maslow's hierarchy, such as self-actualization and mastery. Conversely, exposed to highly curated, rapid, and emotionally salient media, particularly algorithmically generated short-form content utilized and engaged with through scrolling behaviors, can exploit the same plasticity to produce maladaptive effects. Young people and those who are still developing are especially vulnerable to this media having a maladaptive impact. Constant novelty, collapsed transition phases, and vicarious exposure to emotionally charged material can overstimulate dopaminergic pathways in the stratum and nucleus accumbens, disrupting the maturation of prefrontal cortex circuits responsible for impulse control, decision making, and attentional regulation. Casey, Jones, and Hare, 2008. Stress hormone dysregulation, particularly elevated cortisol, has also been observed in response to overstimulation or highly arousing media, which can impair hippocampal function and memory consolidation in adolescence. Lupin et al., 2009. In essence, the same gamble driver that evolved to encourage exploration and survival can be hijacked to encourage compulsive scrolling, reducing opportunities for reflective processing and intentional learning. This vulnerability is magnified by the findings from the adverse childhood experiences literature, which shows that early life stress, neglect, or traumas can produce long-term alterations in brain structure, stress response systems, and emotional regulation through toxic stress and maladaptive cognitive impacts via the toxic stress through the traumas experienced, which negatively impact the neurological development of the individual at an early age, via brain plasticity being an increasing factor to that likelihood. And that's demonstrated in Felitte et al. 1998, and also Felitte and Ander. Algorithmically curated media can function as a contemporary analog, delivering rapid, unpredictable impressions that continuously stimulate neural reward pathways, creating persistent attentional biases and emotional reactivity. The effects are compounded for younger audiences due to brain plasticity, in the same way that adverse childhood experiences it increase the likelihood for developing minds, that the trauma will, through the process of toxic stress, have a negative impact on neurological development. The effects are compounded for those who are still developing, whose neural circuits for impulse control, working memory, and emotional regulation are still maturing, heightening the risk for anxiety, impaired social learning, and maladaptive coping strategies. In this way, digital media functions as both an amplifier and modifier of neurodevelopment. While the potential exists for positive outcomes, educational content, skill building, or creative inspiration, the unmoderated consumption of algorithmic feeds represents a persistent cognitive and emotional gamble. Just as Pandora's box contained both peril and hope, the smartphone and digital media environment presents developing minds with opportunities for growth, but simultaneously exposure to risks that may leave lasting imprints on cognition, behavior, and emotional health. Understanding these dynamics underscores the importance of mindful engagement, structured media environments, and reflective pauses to support healthy brain development in the digital age. So we've used the word short-form content, short-form scrolling content, algorithmic scrolling behaviors, algorithmic short-form content scrolling behaviors. So what do we mean by that? So to understand what makes a scrolling behavior distinct from other methods to access media, such as a podcast or a radio show or old school television, cable, Sky, whatever it was called in your localized area. Long form content is definitely above 5 minutes, but we're usually thinking about 15, 30, 45, 1 hour, 2 hours onwards, requiring deliberate searches or choice, agency, and autonomy. Typing into a search bar, selecting a television program, or choosing a movie at the movie theatre or DVD store back in the day before the digital epoch merged into what it is currently. Long-form content connects directly to the user's existing world of thoughts, hobbies, or needs, such as cooking tutorials or fitness routines, house repairs, or lectures. The user is using agency and autonomy, their own free will, to access the media. Okay, and therefore it's a derivative of the individual that's accessing the content, not the content accessing the individual. Having a smartphone, emails, internet, whatever it may be, is a connector to the world, but it's also the world's connector to you. And having appropriate self-care and autonomy and agency around that distinction is crucial. Long-form content provides a natural continuity structure with introductions, credits, narratives, conclusions, and even ad breaks that echo older media and also are evolutionary capabilities for environmental changes which utilize transitionary periods. And most importantly, long-form content engages and promotes in autonomy. The viewer, the person watching the media, is actively choosing to consume and knows their reasons as to why. Short-form scrolling content, on the other hand, removes choice. The viewer, the user, does not pick what appears next, and the algorithm feeds it to the user. This collapses autonomy and agency, and the user is not exercising intentional free will, but reacting to whatever stimulus appears. We often speak in psychotherapeutic work of reaction versus responding. When we react to something, we do it in a way without agency. Okay, it was almost all our internal processes meeting the environment in that moment has led to a reaction, such as witnessing a car crash and feeling anxiousness, the heart racing, maybe getting out of the area or something, a reaction, as opposed to a responding, which is where the individual has agency and perhaps sees that same car crash and chooses to collect his breathing, perhaps check himself and any close family nearby, and then maybe going over to that car crash to provide assistance or call relative authorities or whatever it may be. Response versus reaction. Long-form content, you're responding to the media or the platforms that provide the media. Short-form scrolling, you're reacting to the media you see. Okay. The social media feed, For You page, whatever it is called on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, it is curated based on your user data points and also the developer's agenda for maximizing engagement, advertising revenue, or ideological influence. The short-form structure exploits evolutionary drivers of novelty seeking, gamble mechanics, transition collapse, to override natural memory encoding, producing a temporal distortion, such as the phrase we hear often, "I can't remember the last 100 videos I scrolled past." A further danger lies in the process of incremental desensitization. Algorithms operate not only to maximize attention but to shape it. After showing a user hundreds of videos aligned with their existing comfort zone, the platform can begin to insert a small portion of content that the user might initially reject or avoid. For example, the first 100 videos is almost 100% match for users' interests, with perhaps 5 videos outside of the norm. The next 100 videos, 10 outside of the norm. Over time, slow exposure escalates until the once unengaged content becomes familiar, less unengaging or just psychologically disturbing, and eventually enjoyable. Through this process, the feed slowly reconditions the psyche, which was once resisted, becomes accepted, then liked, and finally identified with. This is not passive entertainment, it is a transfer of algorithmic logic into the self of the viewer. The short-form feed becomes a medium of identity shaping through desensitization and reinforcement, bypassing the reflective pause that long-form or intentional media once provided. The vulnerabilities created by heightened plasticity and reward-driven conditioning set the stage for the temporal distortions and memory disruptions we observe in algorithmic scrolling behavior media consumption. Temporal distortion and memory. One of the most profound consequences of algorithmically curated short-form scrolling content consumption is the disruption of the temporal perception and memory encoding. Whereas long-form content naturally segments experiences through narrative structure, introductions, conclusions, credits, short-form feeds collapse time into a continuous, unbroken stream. Users are repeatedly exposed to a novel stimuli without the natural transition phases that evolutionarily we are equipped to process and encode experiences with. This results in temporal distortion, the subjective experience of time passing rapidly or without awareness of how the time passed, coupled with the objective inability to recall specific content or the order in which it was encountered. Cognitive neuroscience identifies two key systems for memory encoding. The working memory central executive coordinates attention and integrates information, while the episodic buffer and long-term memory systems consolidate experiences into coherent retrievable episodes. Badley, 2000. Disruption of either system can impair memory encoding. Classic case studies illustrate these mechanics, such as Clive Waring, a musician who retained procedural memory ability to flawlessly play a piano, but lost the capacity to form new episodic memories beyond seconds, shows how attentional and consolidation systems can be impaired while skills persist. Conversely, patients with isolated motor memory defects demonstrate the reverse, retaining episodic memory capacity but losing procedural skills. These examples highlight that memory is multifaceted and successful encoding requires both attentional engagement and the temporal structuring of experience. When the brain is rapidly exposed to a series of unpredictable, high salient stimuli, each engaging the evolutionarily gamble driver, these encoding mechanisms are overwhelmed, and users may experience a sensation of unrecorded time, recalling few, if any, concrete details despite hours spent scrolling. This is consistent with the research on continuous partial attention, which demonstrates that divided attention and constant novelty impair the formation of durable memories. Rosen et al., 2013. From a psychological perspective, temporal distortion reinforces the experiential gamble described earlier. Each swipe is a wager not only on what will appear next, also on the fleeting, poorly encoded rewards of prior content. The unpredictability of the outcome, combined with the rapid, unsegmented flow of information, creates a feedback loop similar to gambling on uncertain reinforcement schedules observed in Skinnerian experiments. Critically, the experiential gambling engages higher order needs identified in Maslow's hierarchy: social recognition, esteem, self-actualization. Novelty, social validation, and identity-relevant content appear as rewards, while the rapid temporal collapse prevents reflective awareness of accumulated exposure, increasing susceptibility to habituation, desensitization, and psychological subversion. In sum, algorithmic scrolling behavior not only hijacks the gambling driver, but also impairs memory processing and temporal awareness by overwhelming the central executive and episodic memory systems. Feeds prevent coherent encoding of experience, leaving users immersed in a continuous stream of poorly retained impressions. The consequence is an algorithmically engineered reality in which attention, memory, and self-perception are manipulated through the interplay of evolutionary drivers, experiential gambling, and temporal distortion. Pandora's box revisited. The modern metaphor. Having the cognitive, behavioral, and evolutionary mechanisms that underpin our interaction with the media, it is instructive to return to the metaphor of Pandora's box. Just as Pandora was given a sealed container with a warning, the modern smartphone functions as a portable Pandora's box, a device of possibility, curiosity, and consequence. Each swipe, click, or scroll represents a conscious or semi-conscious decision to open it. Unlike Pandora, who could not foresee the consequences of her curiosity, users are often aware that each impression carries potential psychological or emotional cost, yet the gamble driver, honed through millennia of evolution, compels continued engagement. The contents of this digital box are double-edged. At its best, it can deliver learning, inspiration, or moments of joy, equivalent to the hope that remained at the bottom of Pandora's box in the story. A user might encounter an educational video, a tutorial on a new skill, or content that fosters creativity and self-actualization. Yet with every engagement comes exposure to the modern allegories of the ancient evils. Lust manifests in sexualized content, gluttony in unhealthy food trends or mindless consumption, pride in ego-affirming performative social validation, and disease in sedentary immobilized posture of prolonged scrolling. Anger, envy, and greed also emerge in various ways. Anger, the outrage, the envy, the outrage, and the greed, the excessive compulsive consumerism. Each impression leaves its mark, shaping not only thought but feelings and behaviors, our whole self, effectively dyeing the soul in the manner warned of by Marcus Aurelius. In this sense, the modern Pandora's box is both opportunity and peril, but that's what all gambling hinges on. Unlike classical media, where transition phases, narrative structure, and user agency allow time for reflection and memory encoding, short-form, algorithmically curated content engaged with through scrolling behavior bypasses these evolutionary checks. The rapid-fire succession of novel stimuli exploits innate novelty preference, and the gamble driver and vicarious learning mechanisms simultaneously hijack attention and erode reflective capacity. In this is an emergent landscape which human development, cognitive function, and emotional regulation can be subtly shaped or subverted by the curated content of this digital Pandora's box. Users gamble not with gold or grain, as in classical survival scenarios, but with attention, time, memory, and ultimately the composition of their own identity and selfhood. Thus, Pandora's box remains powerful, a structured metaphor for the modern experience. The phone is the box. Each scroll is an opening. Each impression is a potential blessing or a potential curse. The evils of old have their digital equivalents, and just as myth warned of irreversibility, the impacts of these impressions can leave lasting traces on development, and the dying of the soul. Hope, as ever, remains, but its efficacy depends on mindful engagement, reflective pause, and the conscious assertion of agency and free will over the relentless flow of the curated scrolling feed. Maladaptive impact: psychological, neurological, physiological, social, emotional. Just as the smartphone acts as a modern Pandora's box, the contents of this box exerts influence across the whole self, psychologically, neurologically, physiologically, and so on. The unpredictable, algorithmically curated stream of short-form content exploits the evolutionary gamble driver, drawing on this novelty preference. Each scroll, click, or video is a wager for the next impression. Over time, this produces a temporal distortion through hours of engagement passing with minimal retention, leaving users unable to recall the sequence of or substance of prior content. Memory encoding is also disrupted at the central executive of working memory, and episodic consolidation systems are overloaded. So, the psychological impacts that are negative or maladaptive is the erosion of attention and reflective capacity, incremental desensitization, the temporal distortion, and the potential traumatizing through vicarious experience, as we see that young developing minds in their increased state of brain plasticity also have an increased vulnerability or susceptibility to negative impacts psychologically. Neurologically, there's overload in the memory function. There's a dopamine-driven reward anticipation leading to compulsive patterns, which we see within addiction. And there's disrupted prefrontal development in youth or developmental years, leading to impaired impulse control. Physiologically, there's sedentary behaviors leading to health risks, stress hormone deregulation, increased cortisol, although within that fractionization methodology, there will be both deregulation and regulatory media displayed in specific sequences to support the widening of the window of tolerance of a user or a viewer. And then also alters sleep cycles, of course, from overstimulation. The smartphone as a modern Pandora's box restructures attention, memory, and self-perception across our whole self, the mind, brain, body, and the external society. Hope remains possible, but only through agency, free will, autonomy, reflective pause, and intentional curation. Okay, so the hope there is your education, your occupation. Remember, we can use the digital world for three things: entertainment, occupation, and education. Key takeaway, really, when returning to Pandora's box as a structured metaphor, the smartphone is the box. It's a vessel of opportunity and risk. Every swipe, every scroll, every click is a deliberate or semi-conscious opening of a digital box, a gamble. Each impression carries potential value, learning, creativity, a social connection, but also potential harm, mirroring the ancient evils: lust, gluttony, pride, disease, anger, envy, outrage. These impressions leave their marks on our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, effectively dyeing our souls in the manner the Stoics warned. Hope remains, as in the myth, but its realization depends on the viewer's capacity for reflective pause, agency, and intentional engagement. The metaphor is therefore complete, and the jar is the box, is the device, each opening a gamble, and the contents, both positive and negative, shape identity, cognition, and the lived experience of the self. From a scientific perspective, the modern Pandora's box operates through a convergence of evolutionary, cognitive, and behavioral mechanisms. Short-form scrolling behaviors through algorithmically created feeds and content exploits the innate gamble drive and novelty preference and vicarious learning. By collapsing natural transition phases and delivering rapid, unpredictable rewards, these platforms bypass attention, encoding, and reflective processes. Temporal distortion emerges. Users experience extended time engagement, yet recall little of what's been consumed, reflecting overload of the central executive and episodic memory systems. The experiential gambling engages needs across Maslow's whole hierarchy, and often at the cost of diminished agency and attentional control. Over time, the user's psychological state, cognitive patterns, and physiological health can be subtly shaped by the continuously curated flow of impressions. Memory coding, emotional regulation, and attentional modulation are impaired, producing not only fleeting distraction but lasting influence on the structure and function of the self. Taken together, these dual conclusions, the metaphorical and the scientific, underscore the full implications of the modern algorithmic short-form scrolling content behavior. The phone is Pandora's box. The content is simultaneously a gift and a threat. The consequences are both narrative and neural. They shape our identity, habits, cognitive capacities, and emotional well-being. Recognizing this duality is crucial. Hope remains, but only through mindful, free will, autonomous, and agency-based engagement, reflection, and assertion of agency can the user navigate the digital world without being overwhelmed by its hidden, unpredictable evils. It's Pandora's box, revisited, a modern metaphor. Please check out Wellbeing Monitor. We are a digital application, but we intend to support individuals to develop their mental health resilience and their critical thinking ability and their free will, autonomy, and agency. Just as Rogers said, let's facilitate positive growth. Thank you for your time.